All right, I'm just going to say it. I'm going to come out here and say what has been on all of our minds if you're on Twitter and follow trans people, or on the left and know trans people. The biggest chasers are not cis men or cis women, who are rarely but sometimes talked about. They are, in fact, trans women. Trans women are the biggest chasers out of any demographic. And it's not just because they're constantly fucking each other. It is because there are trans people who engage in problematic behaviors that we would associate with being a chaser. Namely, constantly talking about the genitalia that many people who are trans do not like having. If they like having it, talking about it and being into it is probably fine. But if they're really not into it, you probably shouldn't be doing that. It's kind of disrespectful. But there are these transbian types, the types who exclusively date trans women. Maybe they'll date cis women, some of them. But either there's not a cis woman who wants to be with them, or it's just not ideal for them because they have this preference. They don't end up doing it. So they're like T for T exclusively. And what does this lead to? This leads to a situation where everybody on the left or who is in favor of trans rights does not say a peep about these people because they assume it is something to be left to the trans community internally. And the trans community doesn't talk about it because they're mentally scarred by the world that they exist in and end up being kind of immature and unable to speak up about something that you'll hear mutters about if you get anywhere near them and they get honest enough. So I'm going to say it because I am an angry cis white male who says what I fucking think. And I think it's bad. I think it's bad what I keep seeing. Because you have these people who, simply because they are transgender themselves, or at least claim to be, create the environment where other trans people feel like they are safe. They feel like they are free from harm because they are among their own kind. Not unlike the way that white people will naturally feel more comfortable with other white people, or black people will naturally feel more comfortable with other black people, and so on. There is a natural human instinct to want to be amongst your own kind, especially if one group, in this case being cis, straight men, have historically been oppressive towards your group. It creates a certain amount of nationalist or separatist sentiment, understandably so, within that group, even though I may not agree with it, and I think we should all work together, we should all live together and live as humans. We're far away from that. I can acknowledge the reality that we're far away from that. And so, of course, understandably, they want to be amongst their own kind. And so, because of this false air of safety that these trans people are experiencing in these T for T communities, they end up being taken for a ruse. because these trans chasers, trans people who are exhibiting the problematic or abusive or disrespectful tendencies of actual, or not actual, but cis chasers, the people who we would traditionally be talking about when talking about that group, merely because they are trans, they get a free pass for exhibiting all of those behaviors, even though it makes the people whom they are interacting with deeply uncomfortable, bothered, and in general, it causes emotional distress. But they feel like they can't speak up about it, because if they were to do so, it would reflect badly on the movement. Perhaps it would be simply too scary amongst their friend group or their community, where all of the people inhabiting it are other trans people who are equally insecure or emotionally immature otherwise. They simply do not talk about it, except in private. And this creates this situation where the behavior is being perpetuated because nobody is coming out against it. Nobody is coming out and saying that chasers who happen to be trans women themselves, or the other way around for that matter, are a problem. They are a problem. And they're a much bigger problem than you'd assume based on the discourse as it is right now. And so, I would say this. You're not safe in your separatist community where it's only other people of your kind, because humans are extremely varied. Humans are individuals. And it may seem like the air of safety is there, the auspice of safety is there, but it's not. Ultimately, you cannot broadly essentialize these groups of people, because every group of people has certain stereotypes that may be accurate depending on the individual, but there's a big asterisk there, and it's immediately after the word individual. That's going to be key to all of this. You have to treat people as individuals. And so, of course, I understand the revulsion towards a group of people which has probably disproportionately targeted you, harassed you, and discriminated against you. But this is the unfortunate reality. The people who are ostensibly a part of your group are not always safe to be around. And I'm sure logically you know that. I'm sure if you explained this to yourself with a very basic example, like some trans people will end up murdering someone, you would be able to tell yourself, okay, one of them might murder me. Very unlikely, but it could happen, right? You're not going to suddenly assume all trans people are murderers. Reasonably so. The same thing should be done with chasers. Some trans people will inevitably be chasers because everyone is an individual, and some people simply have bad tendencies in their behavior and mindset. But this fact of the world is just swept under the rug because it makes people uncomfortable to acknowledge, or they think it would be optically bad to mention, or they simply do not have the emotional resolve to admit it to themselves and then the world around them. But they vaguely gesture at it. They kind of whisper it to one another in these very enclosed spaces. And as a result of their indifference or their inability to speak out, these issues continue to be perpetuated. And so I'll leave you with this basic tenet of progressivism, which I stand very firmly on. if all human beings are individuals, regardless of the group that they come from, if we are to judge people based on the content of their character rather than the color of their skin, the gender that they may have, or the gender identity they may have, then we also have to judge them equally as it pertains to crimes they may commit or bad behavior that they may have, which is not criminal in nature, but is nonetheless worthy of criticism. Those people should be criticized equally, all of them. And so, I will stand here and criticize cis chasers for their unwillingness to understand the feelings of the trans people that they may be attracted to, their indifference to their plight, and their dehumanization and essentialization of those people they happen to be fetishizing. I can do so in the very same breath that I make such criticisms towards the trans community who exhibit the exact same behaviors.